And suddenly the music stops. Hello, everybody. Hooray, hurrah. Once again, the Greg Proops Film Club convenes here in Los Feliz, most enchanting film confabulation, the Los Feliz 3 here at the American Cinematheque for the 1968 classic directed by Mr. Peter Yates, Bullitt. And this is where you applaud. Hooray. I couldn't be more excited to show this movie on a Sunday afternoon because this is exactly the perfect movie you need for today and for the rest of your month. I think you'll remember this as a high point as the days wear on. Getting to see Steve McQueen wear a medium weight blue pullover roll neck cashmere polo turtleneck top is going to be one of the rare moments of excitement in this year, I think, for everybody. I am going to go through everything he wears in the movie, including his watch. And you may have seen the car parked out in front. I have no idea. Who brought that car? Are you here? Oh, do you own that car? Yes. Oh, shit, I was hoping you stole it. Thank you for bringing it. It's my daily driver. Wow, you drive around in a 1968 GTO? All day, every day. A Highland Mustang. Well, right on, dude. Right? Does it burn oil? Not really, no. By the way, this is a podcast, so for the people who are listening in podcast land right now, I'm having a conversation with someone I don't know in the dark, which I think makes this a very much more exciting podcast than the way it started, where you thought it was just going to be a film club, and now we've reached into the after hours Greg Proops Film Club, where Greg talks to men in the dark about the cars they drive. Did you buy it? I assume you bought it used. You couldn't possibly be old enough to have bought a 1968 Mustang Highland Green GTO.
Yeah, it's original Highland Green GT. I bought it in 2007 after a drunk sushi date.
After a drunk sushi date, you bought it in 2007. You know, if I had a nickel for every time I heard about someone buying a car from a Steve McQueen movie after a drunk sushi date, I could do nothing but a podcast about that every week, and we would call it Greg's Japanese Fish Encounter. What was it about the don't talk at the same time as me? It sounds shitty. I'll handle all of that part. Was it the alcohol or was it the mercury that compelled you to buy a Highland Green 1967 Mustang? A little bit of both, sure. How did the date go, by the way? Did you end up marrying that person?
I did not.
Ah, so there's an awesome Hollywood ending to that one. As you know, there's only 3 kinds of endings: good, bad, ambiguous, and David Zaslav. That's 4. Well, thank you for bringing the car. I don't know if you saw it. It's parked out in front, and it's super boss. There were 2 for the picture when they shot it, and they also bought 2 Chargers, and they stripped them down and they souped them up. And McQueen said he was going to, by the way, there's no point in going over the plot of Bullitt. The plot is, it's great. And the idea of the movie is it's super bitchin'. He has a gorgeous brunette girlfriend of infinite proportions, Jacqueline Bisset. He's a disgruntled San Francisco detective. And guess what? In this version of the world, cops aren't all honest. I know. And you'd think after 50 years, things would be a little bit different, but snay, say the gods. Anyway, they had 2 of them, and then they had 2 Dodge Chargers, and they stripped them down, as I say, and they souped them up. And Steve McQueen said he was going to drive his own stunts in this movie. And so he did for a little bit, because Peter Yates was also, 1, a stunt person, and 2, had made a couple of pictures before this, including, for our British fans out there, Cliff Richard's Summer Holiday from 1963. Cliff Richards was like, what if Elvis was hadn't had all of his genitalia? And he was the English version, as they always like to say. There's always an English. My father used to say that people were the poor man's version. Does anyone remember that? Like you'd go, Josh Mostel was the poor man's James Coco or whatever. And there, I think I've lost everybody with that reference. But I always loved the idea that there were people out there who couldn't afford the real article, and so they had to get someone slightly lower than that. It would be like if in the 70s, the Oreo Hydrox conundrum, which is the corollary to the sushi Japanese food encounter. Well, it's not a corollary. Well, you'll follow along soon. And so he said, McQueen told the director, Peter Yates, that he was going to, and then Peter Yates made a movie called Robbery with Stanley Baker. And that was the picture that Steve McQueen saw and said, I want Peter Yates to direct this. And mostly that and to get the studio off his ass. Now, when he pitched the movie, I think he went to Jack Warner and he said, it's a cop movie. And Jack Warner said, there's loads of cop movies. And Steve McQueen said, yeah, but this cop has elbow patches. Yeah. I want to let that resonate with you for a while, because now it doesn't mean much to you, but once the movie gets underway, you're going to be like, those elbow patches are so bitchin' I could die. And then you'll notice this movie, a couple of years later, our friend Don Siegel, who made Charlie Varick that we showed last year. And by the way, Jennifer picks all these movies. And she picked Bullitt for many good reasons, one of which is it's super awesome. But two, it is a fuck you to the man kind of movie from the 60s, whereas the cop is the center of it, is the one saying fuck you to the man, which makes it the beginning of that genre of movies. And by the mid-70s, of course, there was 10,000 of them. The producer of this movie also produced The 7-Ups and The French Connection, in case you were wondering if he liked car chases. Because he put them in every goddamn cop movie he made after that. A few years later, Dirty Harry appears, right? Played by Clint Eastwood, who is a cop in San Francisco with a bitching wardrobe, wearing elbow patches. There. I rest my case. I don't want to say they were competitive, but hello. Clint Eastwood stole the elbow patches from Steve McQueen. He stole San Francisco from Steve McQueen, and he put them both in another movie. And then there's what, 8, 10, 12 Dirty Harry movies. There's Magnum P.I. and Kip Kip Magoo and all the ones that he made. And also, by the way, Steve McQueen was offered The Gauntlet, which is a later, not Dirty Harry, but super psychopathic right-wing cop Clint Eastwood movie. Which Clint Eastwood ended up doing with Sandra Bullock. So he said to Peter Yates, I'm going to drive the car in this movie. And he had done a bunch of the stunts, right, for The Great Escape, for John Sturges, who directed that movie, and the awesome Magnificent Seven. By the way, if you're my age, which is 108, you'll remember that your father, when he had control of the television set of a day, had a certain type of movie that he liked. And the kind of movies that dads liked in the 60s and early 70s were Steve McQueen movies. We're talking about The Cincinnati Kid, The Magnificent Seven, Papillon, Bullitt, The Thomas Crown Affair, I Rest My Case. These are movies about men who are super awesome, who have bitching wardrobes and beautiful girlfriends. And that's what the whole thing was about. Not James Bond, because this might really happen. And thank you, that was a joke. This is a comedy show, by the way. But what I love about LA is that mixture of innocence and heinousness that distinguishes this town, where no one is really innocent, and yet people will get upset over the smallest things. I remember going to see Casino here when it came out. You may remember one of Martin Scorsese's movies before he completely lost the fucking plot. And and I don't blame him anyway. He made that, so good for him. There's a scene in Casino where Joe Pesci brutally murders someone with a ballpoint pen. Hello. And then someone applauded for that. And then there's another scene in the movie where Sharon Stone snorts coke in front of her daughter and goes, "Don't do this, honey," and then does a big rail. And I remember seeing it in LA, in Hollywood, in a movie theater. No one said a word during the ballpoint pen murder. When she snorted coke in front of her daughter, the whole audience went, "Oh." I would put forward to you a corollary to something that the great wit Fran Lebowitz once said, where she said, parents say things like, "I don't want anyone smoking around my children." And she said, "Who would you rather have drive your kids to school? Someone who's smoking or someone who's been drinking the whole way?" Thank you for that minor laughter, which had a very feminine cast to it at the back of the room. Men are a hard crowd, man. They really are. When you tell them their dicks are tiny and curved and disappointing and that they haven't really done shit, they get really mad at you. And they refuse to laugh for the rest of the show. That's why Steve McQueen is so important to men. He substitutes as their bravado, anti-hero. And that's the thing about Steve McQueen. You hear a lot about anti-heroes. There are, of course, none now. But there were. And there was your Charles Bronson and whatnot. Charles Bronson, of course, then became a right-wing hero, which is what happens to anti-heroes. And fortunately for us, Steve McQueen wasn't able to reach that point in his career where he started playing right-wing anti-heroes. And so he stayed on this side. And by anti-hero, what do you mean? Well, he's a policeman, but his boss is a drag, so he has to fight against the man. In the Sand Pebbles, he's in the United States Navy, but they're fighting an unjust war against an Asian country, and so he has to fight against the man. In The Blob, he's a teenager in 50s America, but there's a giant blob headed toward Earth to eat everyone, and so he has to stand up against the man. So it's a through line in all. And in the Thomas Crown Affair, he's a rich billionaire three-piece suit wearing cigar smoking dude, but in order that he can feel any real emotions, he has to steal money from banks so he can kick against the man. I think you can see where we're going with this. So the kind of movies that Steve McQueen made were the kind of movies that I think really, Papillon, where he's a gangster pimp from Marseille, but he's unjustly thrown in jail for being a gangster pimp from Marseille. And has to kick against the man. He also maintained almost the same haircut for every single movie from 1955 to 1974, which I really appreciate. Sort of a modified gray, as we would have called it in those days, a butch. In the 60s, when I was little, when the summer came, you were marched to the barber shop, and they put this weird piece of paper around your collar, because, you know, kids are often so outgoing, going out after they go to the barbershop, so that you don't get hair down your shirt. And they would take the razor and, like, Full Metal Jacket your hair like that. Just, and that was called a butch, and that was for the summer. So we all had the same THX 1138 haircut through the summertime. But Steve McQueen kind of fancied that one, and he really goes with it. He never has long hair, except for The Reavers and Enemy of the State, where he wears a beard. But not Enemy of the State. I'm getting the name of the Ibsen play wrong. Enemy of the People, rather. But no one's ever seen Enemy of the People with Steve McQueen in it, because no one ever went, you know what I'd really like Steve McQueen to do? Branch out from driving a Mustang or a motorcycle and fighting the Nazis or the cops that are evil, and do an Ibsen play. So it was one of those moments, but in any case, he told Peter Yates, yeah, we're not done with this story yet. He told Peter Yates, I'm gonna drive the Mustang in the movie, and Peter Yates like, fine. And then he got in behind the wheel of the Mustang, and by the way, the car chase that takes part, in case you're timing it, at 1 hour and 5 minutes into the movie. The car chase takes place, that's so unbelievably famous. McQueen is driving for lots of it, and has a complete spin out at one point. And the car ends up screeching to a halt on the side of the road in the dirt. That was really Steve McQueen driving, and that was the last day he stunt drove. After that, Bud Elkins was brought in and was already there, and he took the wheel of the Mustang, and another stunt driver took the wheel of the Charger. Just to get things done, first things first. The Mustang is a 1968 Ford GT in Highland Green, as we discussed. The bad guy's car is a 68 Dodge Charger with a 440 Magnum V8. The sport coat was a dark brown and tan herringbone woolen tweed. It was made by the costumer of the movie, and he kept it afterward because it's so bitching. I had the maker of the turtleneck, and I've lost it. If you know who made it, the blue turtleneck is a medium weight cashmere, navy blue. And then he doesn't wear a t-shirt under it, you'll see. At one scene, he pulls it up, and he's wearing a St. Christopher medal that his first wife gave him. The gun is a custom 2-inch Colt Diamond back with a wound-down handle, right? He had it customed, and he wears it upside down in a quick-draw holster like that, because there was a famous San Francisco detective when I was a little kid. And there was these terrible murders called the zebra killings. And this detective chased down, or tried to chase down the zebra killer, and his name was Dave Toschi. And he was really famous in San Francisco. And Dave Toschi wore a turtleneck and a shoulder holster with an upside down quick draw. And Steve McQueen lifted it and uses it in the movie. Now, we were having a discussion at breakfast the other day, me and a couple guys, and I was discussing that in all of the William Friedkin and subsequent New York cop movies, all of the New York cops wear their gun on their ankle. But all of the LA and San Francisco cops wore their gun here. Discuss. So I'm not sure why that happened, but it did happen. And you'll see, when you look at early 70s cop movies from New York City, there's always a burning trash can fire and a dog running down the street and garbage up against cyclone fences. And then when you see West Coast cop movies from the 60s, California looks awesome. San Francisco's beautiful in this movie. There's maybe one part of it where you see where they put the gangster at the beginning in a crappy hotel near the Embarcadero Freeway, which they tore down a few years ago. And by a few, I mean 30. In San Francisco time, that's like yesterday. And that's maybe the crummiest neighborhood they go to in this movie. They also go to a jazz bar and see jazz, because one thing that can't be left out of this picture is that Lalo Schifrin did the score. And Lalo just Schifrined off into the heavens a few months ago, in fact, and wrote the score for 10 million things. The thing you'll know Lalo Schifrin for the most, of course, because he did the Dirty Harry movie, as well as Bullitt, is, and he did Charlie Varick, for goodness sakes, that we showed last year, is the Mission Impossible theme, which is irresistible. He was an Argentinian Jew, and he came to the United States, and he worked with Dizzy Gillespie, and then he got a gig with the studios doing scores for television shows and movies. And I think you'll find his use of the flute is, pretty goddamn exciting in this movie. Now, Steve McQueen owned, personally, over 100 motorcycles and 100 cars. And I think the motorcycle that he's on in this movie is one of his. And stars by this point, Robert Redford and him notably, are wearing their own jewelry. Now, he doesn't wear any jewelry, as I said, but the St. Christopher in this movie. But if you watch Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor and stuff, the bracelet that he has is his. And Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor carries a bitching man bag in the movie that's like a little rucksack. And that was the costume, the set decorators, and he nicked it from him. The watch that Steve is wearing in the movie is the Benrus Series 3061 with a black face. And you had to wind it. It was hand wound, not self-winding. You'll thank me for this later. And the boots, which are the crux of the entire motion picture. Once you see them, I think you'll never really forget them. They're Hutton's original Playboy boots made of saddle brown suede leather uppers and black crepe soles, and he wears them with black rib socks. Now, up until this point, cops in every movie wore black brogues with black socks or white socks. Steve McQueen is wearing bitching chukka boots. And if you go back to the movie of The Great Escape from 1963, where he plays Cooler King, you'll notice in that movie he rides his own motorcycle and is, in fact, a Nazi chasing himself in one of the scenes in that movie. They dressed him in a Nazi uniform and had him chase himself in his own motorcycle. He wears a sawed-off sweatshirt with chinos and a leather jacket. And I'm pretty sure the leather jacket was his. No one wore a sawed-off sweatshirt in World War II, except for Steve McQueen. What I'm saying is his fashion advice is something that men need to heed even now. And as I walk down the streets here in Los Feliz and look at how some of the men are dressed with their Hello Kitty knapsacks and their baseball hats, someone just went, oh. I would remind gentlemen that when the weather gets warm, it's not necessary that you wear flip-flops. There are a dazzling variety of other summer shoes, and that no one but the most bizarre fetishist wants to see men's feet. The reason why women are often unresponsive and reluctant to perform the sexual position reverse cowgirl is the simple, unalterable, irrefutable fact that the sight of men's feet during the act of sexual congress is perhaps the greatest drawing agent in the history of mankind. Not since Charlie Kirk got married has there been a greater drawing agent. Not since Stephen Miller appeared on television has there been something that made women's ovaries shrivel up and blow away like a tumbleweed in the Joshua National Forest. You would have to go to the Angeles Crest in the height of August to find a dry patch as hard as the one you'll find when you wear flip-flops on the street. And I don't want to hear any bullshit. I don't want to hear this man, the men, we want to be comfortable. What about us? What about us? Let me get this straight. I'm supposed to gaze upon your feet and then consume food into my body during the same lunar cycle. Here's something I'll point out. Robert Redford, Clint Eastwood, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, all these guys I'm talking about. I'll even go further. Alain Delon, Jean-Paul Belmondo, Tristram Mifune, Sidney Poitier, all these great action stars, Richard Roundtree. They never wore fucking flip-flops, you guys. Yeah. And, as Curtis Mayfield said, baddest bitches in the bed. Curtis Mayfield didn't say, man, these flip-flops are kicking it. No woman looks at a guy wearing flip-flops and goes, man, he's really free and easy. They think whatever other things in his life is he skimping on. Like hygiene or changing his sheets and shit like that. Or ever buying new Fruit Loops or whatnot. I don't mean to be scolding. No, it's a happy occasion. It really is. Because when you get to watch a picture like this, that's so bravura and really hangs together the message at this late date, of course. From 1968, we had counterculture. And what we needed was an anti-hero. And he boiled through the 50s, right? There's Hell is for Heroes and all that. Soldier in the Rain, Baby, the Rain Must Fall. Steve McQueen I'm talking about. Then he got on telly. And he was on a show that you guys don't know, but still showed in reruns when I was a little kid called Wanted, Dead or Alive. Now, if you saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Tarantino, you saw Westerns, right, shown in their glory. In the late 50s, early 60s, there were maybe 7,000 Westerns on television. And every single actor was in one, including Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was on Wagon Train, and his character was called fantastically Rowdy. Rowdy Yates was his name. Well, Steve McQueen, and the plot of every single one of these shows was the same. They went from town to town, they didn't want any trouble, and then they had to kill a motherfucker. And Wanted Dead or Alive, Steve McQueen didn't wear a revolver. He wore a sawed-off Winchester in his holster, right? A super bitchin'. And then Chuck Connors, as you recall, who was famous, one, for playing baseball in the Dodgers organization, and two, for making male pornography here in the 50s. Chuck Connors played the rifleman, and he was a man of peace who didn't want any trouble, but eventually he would shoot you with his rifle. So Steve got a huge boost from being in Wanted, Dead or Alive and became a star on television. And then they offered him the Magnificent Seven, where he was to play behind Yul Brynner as the lead, right? And he couldn't get out of his deal. And so he pretended to injure himself and told the producers of the TV show he couldn't show up to work, and then went and shot the Magnificent Seven. So when he was on the Magnificent Seven, Yul was the producer and wanted to be the director, by the way, but didn't. Yul was 5'7" and didn't ride a horse very well, and actually didn't do quick draw very well. Even though he played the King and Iron, Taurus Bulba, and gaslit Ingrid Bergman, and is the most macho, virile male star you'll ever meet, Yul Brynner. My friend Jeff Davis was a child in the last version of The King and I with Yul Brynner, and he said he saw Yul Brynner slug a kid, which is fantastically wild. The kid said something, and Yul Brynner went, bam, not in front of a lady. And so he wasn't a sissy, as they say, or shrinking violet. Yul Brynner had the ground built up for a lot of the scenes he was in so that he'd be taller, and as tall as some of the other members of the cast, including awesomely Robert Vaughn, who's in this movie as well. And Steve McQueen would come before the shots and kick down the mound. When you watch The Magnificent Seven, when you watch it again after this, which I'm sure you'll be doing tomorrow, you'll notice that every scene where there's more than one of them on camera, and McQueen's on camera with Yul Brynner, McQueen fiddles. There's a scene where they ride down the hill and McQueen plays with his hat. There's a scene at a funeral and McQueen twirls his rifle. And Brynner knew he was doing this shit every fucking day. On the set, fucking with him, trying to pull focus. And didn't say anything until one day he said, "All right, Steve, that's it," and squared off with him. And McQueen said, "What the fuck do I care? I've been beaten up before," right? So they had it out. Then, when Steve was passing away of cancer, he phoned Yul Brynner. And he said to Yul Brynner, "You could have kicked me off the movie when I rattled you, but you let me stay and that picture made me, so thanks." And Brynner said, "I am the king. And you are the rebel prince. Every bit as royal and dangerous to cross." I Give You from 1968, directed by Peter Yates, starring Jacqueline Bisset, Robert Vaughn, and Steve McQueen, Bullitt.